Hey A&Pers, this is Dr. Jones checking in. This is A&P 2 Lecture Test 4, Video 1, and we'll be starting at page 2 of the note set. So here is the front of the note set. We are covering chapters 23 and 24, respiratory and digestion. So top of page 2. Dun, dun, dun. All right. Says we have an embryo slide first, so let's look at that. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so here's your little heart at 3 weeks. At 3 weeks, it's not so much a heart, but there are contractile cells that are like randomly sparking. So when they say that you have a heartbeat at 3 weeks, they're largely exaggerating. That's no. I mean, the cells are sparking, so technically, but no. So then you can see at 4 weeks, you start these little lung buds and the little trachea grows, pulmonary groove turns into the little trachea, and then the little primary bronchi, and then the secondary bronchi, and then those branch out and make the bronchioles and alveoli. The alveoli are the little bubbles at the ends. So here you can see the pleural cavity at 4 weeks. You were the size and shape of a cashew, and you looked like like an alien manatee baby. Hey, at least manatees are cute, right? Okay, so at this state inside, you've got one little tube for your digestion, and these are the two little lung buds here and here. This is what they look like in the cross section, and there's some heart-y type tissue going on, and the lung buds are clearly behind the heart, as you can see on this picture as well. And then at 6 weeks, 2 weeks later, look, the little limb buds. So your arms and legs start as little buds. Your little arms started first, of course, and then the legs. And you can see that the developing lung tissue has gotten bigger. And then at 9 weeks, it has moved forward and is working to surround the heart. So cute. All right, moving on. The respiratory system. Okay, first let's talk about cells and energy. Cells need energy for maintenance, growth, defense, cell division. And this is mostly aerobic metabolism, which uses oxygen and makes carbon dioxide. We'll talk about that in some detail for test 5, not today. Okay. We will cardiovascular, we moved the blood to all the tissues. And so now for respiratory, we're going to talk about how to get the oxygen into the blood. Okay, 5 basic functions, which is what that says. First bullet, we have surface area for gas exchange, and those will be all of these little bubbles of alveoli. Second bullet, move air to and from the exchange surface. That'll be all of the conducting portion, which are the tubes that move air to the exchange surface, the alveoli. Third, humidify and cool or warm the air and protect from pathogens, and that largely happens in the nasal cavities. We'll talk about that. Produce sounds, and that largely happens here in the larynx, which is your voice box. And smell, which of course happens in the epithelial, the olfactory organs at the tops of the 2 nasal cavities. So the upper respiratory system, red. Oh, we're on red. Okay. Here's the line. Everything above this line is the upper respiratory system, and everything below the line is the lower respiratory system. So the upper respiratory system includes the nose, the nasal cavities, the sinuses, and the pharynx, which is this area in the back of the throat. Connects the back of the 2 nasal cavities, the left nasal cavity and the right nasal cavity, the back of the oral cavity, the back of the trachea, and the top of the esophagus. So this right here is your pharynx. And we will talk about that again in a second. probably this video. And the lower respiratory system includes the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, bronchioles, and the alveoli. Conducting portion carries air to the exchange surface, as we mentioned. The respiratory portion are the exchange surfaces, which actually will be the alveoli and the tiniest of the bronchioles, which are called respiratory bronchioles because they are part of the exchange surface. And the alveoli are the bubbles of gas exchange surface. The conditioning process is to filter, warm, and humidify the air. And I forgot to turn my timer on. Get into my phone. Okay, let's do 10 minutes from now. Okay, good to go. Page 3, which on my printer makes it right here, the respiratory mucosa and the respiratory defense system. So, respiratory mucosa, next slide. Respiratory mucosa lines the conducting portions, and here's what it looks like. The respiratory defense system is a series of filtration mechanisms. So let's talk about the respiratory mucosa in more detail. The lamina propria is the connective tissue underlying the epithelium, specifically an areolar CT. And where do you find pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium? Which is so fun to say. And that is in the nasal cavities, the superior pharynx, and the, follow it, superior lower respiratory system. So, not quite, lower respiratory system, just the top portion of it has pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. So as you may recall, pseudo means false, stratified means layers, so it has false layers, and ciliated, and you can see all these little cilia here. Columnar because they're taller than they are wide, like columns. And an epithelium because those line internal passageways and chambers. And where do you find stratified squamous epithelium? Stratified squamous epithelium is found in the oral cavity and inferior pharynx. So basically anywhere where you would normally find food. So if you swallow, you eat, you put food in your mouth has stratified squamous epithelium to protect you. If you ever eat anything like super hot, either temperature hot or spicy hot, those extra layers help protect you. Or even super cold or anything sharp, right? You ever get like the Dorito and you think you've got it chewed up, but you don't quite. My best friend in high school had a boyfriend for a year or two that if you, I never tried this, but she did it all the time. When she would give him food, he would just put it in his mouth. He wouldn't ask what it was. He wouldn't like test it for temperature or heat or anything. And so she took great joy in searching out like hyper sour things or spicy things to just feed him, and he would just throw them in his mouth and then have a big reaction. And it was, I don't know, but they thought it was funny, so not my thing. Okay, so stratified squamous epithelium, lots of layers to protect you from the things that you put in your mouth. And where do you find a simple squamous epithelium? In the alveoli, the exchange surface. Because you're trying to move gases, the less cell there is there, the better. And a simple squamous epithelium, a single layer of flat cells, is the least amount of cell you can have. The mucociliary escalator, which is a new term, is that the cilia move the mucus up towards the pharynx. And so the cilia beat, they move, they sweep stuff across the surface of the cell. That's what cilia do. They sweep stuff across the surface of the cell. And so when you smoke, either way, when you smoke anything, I mean, even like stand downwind of the grill, anytime you get smoke in your lungs, the smoke deadens the cilia. It makes them not beat. It makes them not work. And that halts the mucociliary escalator so that crud doesn't get moved up. Now what normally happens is the crud gets moved up, and like if you're asleep, you just swallow it and it gets digested. Part of it. But without the mucociliary escalator, the ciliary movement, that crud just stays in your lungs. Okay. So then what happens when you decide, okay, I am going to be healthier because I love my kids and I want to be here when they graduate and everything else, and it's worth being here for it. And you take that cigarette or whatever it is you're smoking and you stub it out and you say, I'm a quit, I'm done. I'm going to be healthier because whatever reason you have, right? Any reason you can come up with. And then the cilia wake up, surprise, and then they start working again. And so you start coughing up this nastiest, grossest, like crud that you've ever seen in your life. And you say, you know what, I was healthier when I was smoking. So then the proper answer is to pick the cigarette back up and smoke again. No, that's not it. I'm going with Hagrid on this one, better out than in. So even though it's distressing, it's better to get the stuff out of your lungs than to have it in your lungs, decreasing your lung function slowly over time. Okay. And we've talked about informed consent and all of that on these videos, so we won't have that conversation again, but we will reference them. That was me referencing them. Okay. And that's the mucociliary escalator. So that's why. Okay, I normally get questions at this point in the lecture, and questions about this movement that I made in reference to smoking. I don't recommend smoking anything. I also don't recommend doing anything that would keep you from getting your nursing license, keep you from becoming an OTA, a PTA, a kinesiologist, a rad tech, any of whatever your major is, wherever you're taking this class. You have put enough time and energy and effort and life force into this that it's not worth risking for something stupid like that. Not that it's stupid. And pot kills way fewer people than alcohol, and alcohol is legal. However, out of pure self-interest, it's not worth losing your license, your certification. It's not worth losing your career. Informed consent, but my official recommendation is not worth the risk. So, and even if it were legal in Texas, which I'm sure it will be at some point, because it's only logical, as long as it's still illegal federally, which I do think it will be legal at some point because it's only logical, again, kills fewer people than alcohol, which is legal, which makes less sense. But anyway, doing things that are illegal federally, even though they're legal in your state you're doing it in, can still lose you your license. So until that all changes, my official recommendation is not worth it. I always get that question every single semester. So if you weren't thinking it, someone was. Okay. Did we talk about the upper respiratory system? Consists of the nose, nasal cavity, sinuses, pharynx, pretty much everything above the larynx. Okay. And notes on anything you don't remember from lab. I will put a card in the corner. This corner? I think. I think that's where it shows up. And that will link to the Lab 3 videos. So after you have studied these Lab 3 videos, please read this section in the book. I expect you to read all of the sections in the book, but after you've done the lab work, come back and read this section in the book, and anything that you did not know immediately off the top of your head, go ahead and write that down, because these are all lecture and lab materials at this point. The one term in there that is not a lab term is epistaxis, which is our term for nosebleed. And let's talk about the pharynx. It is the back of the throat. As we mentioned, timer is going off. That's a nice timer. Okay. Let's finish. There we go. We'll finish page 3 and call it a day. Call it a video, maybe not a day. Okay, 3 parts. The nasopharynx is, I'm changing color now. Ooh, I want the cyan. Okay, the nasopharynx is this portion behind the nasal cavities. So there are 2 nasal cavities, one on the left and one on the right, but only one nasopharynx. So the opening from each nasal cavity to the outside is the external nares. The opening from each of the 2 nasal cavities to the nasopharynx is the internal nares. So yeah, probably just come up here this way. There we go, nasopharynx. But you only have 1 nasopharynx. You have 2 internal nares. See, the E means plural. I would be singular. And both nasal cavities open into the nasopharynx. I should highlight that in that color. And I didn't highlight it, I wrote over it. Pen color. Is the yellow going to show up? Oh, on the picture it does. Okay. And then we have the oropharynx, is the portion of the pharynx that is behind the oral cavity. The book kind of just points to a dot, but really it's the whole region. So the dots I find to be entirely insufficient to explain the concept. It should be like a bracket. In lab test, there will be a bracket. And then the laryngopharynx. I want the pen color. What color next? Blue. Oh, we're going with magenta. Isn't that odd? Not usually a hot pink person. My mama is a hot pink person. She wears bright pink. My daughter is a hot pink person. This sweater here is the pinkest I get, with little hearts, which I generally forget to wear on Valentine's Day, even though that's why I bought it. Okay, and then the laryngopharynx is the part in front of the larynx. So this, have we talked about noun form versus adjective form this semester? I don't think we have. So the larynx, Y-N-X, and as always, I apologize for writing with a mouse. Larynx is the noun form. A noun is a person, place, thing, or idea. And the adjective form of that is laryngo. A-R-Y-N-G. Actually, laryngeal. So anything that describes the larynx is laryngeal, the laryngeal region, the region of the larynx. If you're having laryngeal infections or laryngeal swelling, or I don't know how you would use it. But when you make science words, you take the 2 roots and you put an O between them and you smush them together. And that's how you make most science words. Lots of science words anyway. So laryngopharynx is the combination of the word larynx and the word pharynx. So larynx, pharynx is not grammatically correct, oddly enough. So we're going with laryngopharynx. So that's why. So an adjective is something that describes a noun. So it could be like a number or a color, like 9 blackbirds. 9 and black describe the birds. So laryngo describes which part of the pharynx. Oro describes which part of the pharynx. Naso describes which part of the pharynx. Okay. And the laryngopharynx opens up into the esophagus. So the pharynx connects left nasal cavity, right nasal cavity, oral cavity, the larynx, which feeds into the trachea, so the air tubes, and the esophagus, which carries food to the stomach, so the digestive tubes. So all of this is connected in the back of the throat, which is the pharynx, and has 3 parts. Okay. So that was AMP2 first lecture test for video, and we covered Notesets pages 2 and 3, which I'm going to make note of so that I can put that in the description. So thank you as always for tuning in. This has been I already said that part. Yeah. So I forget where I was. Yeah. The education must go on. That's what's next. And then I say Dr. Jones out and look for the command control escape. Thanks for tuning in.